much what I had every morning during the MCAT. Espresso, banana. Yo, what is up, my Nakama? So in this video, I'm going to share with you guys how I studied for the MCAT in 4 weeks. Okay, so if you're new here, my name is Daniel and I'm starting medical school this summer. And I took my MCAT last winter break, so I started studying end of December, and then I took the MCAT January 23rd, I believe. So that was about 3 to 4 weeks of studying, essentially 1 month to prepare for the MCAT. And I'm gonna go over sort of my study schedule and how I prepared to take the MCAT in 1 month. So many of you are probably gonna take the MCAT at the end of the summer, so you'll have 2 or 3 months to prepare. And personally for me, I like a sort of condensed study schedule because that's how I feel like I retain the most information and how I absorb the most material in a short period of time. I feel like that if I learn everything at once, I sort of retain it a lot better than if I were to spread it out over 2 or 3 months. Now that's not to say that that type of study style will be beneficial for you. If you're like me and you want to take the MCAT at the end of January, and you have the winter break to prepare for it, then I think this study schedule can be really beneficial for you. So basically what I did is I bought one set of MCAT books called Exam Crackers, and I followed their 2-month schedule. So basically they have a sort of 2-month outline where they go over what books you need to read and what sections you need to read on each day. And what I did was I took that 2-month schedule and I condensed it into 4 weeks. And I literally planned day by day which sections I would read and how much time I would devote to each section. Now the very first thing I did before I started anything was I took a practice test. I took the sample MCAT practice test, I believe, the 2017 version. And based off of that practice test, I sort of wrote down what my biggest weaknesses were. For example, I think I did bad on the CARS section, the critical analysis and reading section. So I knew that I had to focus a little more time on that section compared to the chemistry section, which I almost scored a perfect score on because, at that point in my career at Hopkins, I was almost done with my chemistry major. So I would expect to score high on the chemistry portion of the MCAT. Once I wrote down all of my weaknesses from the first sample test, and sort of what topics and what sections I felt like I should go over the most, I still read over all of the sections of each book, including the chemistry book, and I sort of devoted 2 or 3 hours for each chapter. And as you can see through this OneNote outline that I made about a few years ago when I was taking the MCAT, you can see sort of my study schedule and how I planned out each day and what sections I would read. And basically, I think once a week I would take one practice test. And the most important thing that I did after each practice test was evaluate which sections I did the worst at. And then I would spend the rest of the day after taking that practice test going over those specific sections and those specific topics and mastering them and memorizing them so that I wouldn't make the same mistakes again in future practice tests. And by doing this, I actually saw my score go up by 2 or 3 points after each practice test. So I think my first practice test I scored like 500. I mean the first sample test I scored a 500, which is kind of low. You know, you want a higher score than that to be competitive in your medical school applications. But each time I took the practice test, my score would increase by 2, sometimes even 5 points. You know, by the time I took the actual MCAT, I got a 514. Which I think is a decent score. I mean, it got me into medical school. Now, I do have to admit that my life for those 4 weeks essentially revolved around the MCAT. I would wake up, I would even eat lunch and eat dinner while studying, while reviewing flashcards, while reading the necessary chapters that I had for that day. But I do have to say that I still found time to work out. I still found time to meal prep. And I even had 2 whole days where I didn't do anything except hang out with my family and my girlfriend. It's called Tina Day, as you can see in the outline. And that was the end of the year for New Year's. So even in my rigorous 4-week schedule, I still found time to relax. And I think that that's really important to have some sort of deload day or relaxation day. You know, if you think your brain as a muscle, if you overwork your muscles, you're not going to have an optimal recovery time and you won't get stronger. And similarly, mentally, you're not going to be able to absorb and retain as much information if you overexert yourself. So it's definitely important to build in some rest days and some relaxation days where you just don't even think about the MCAT. You don't do anything but be a slug on the couch and watch Netflix all day. So as you can see by my outline, I actually had about 4 to 5 days before my final MCAT where I completely finished all my readings. And during those 4 to 5 days, I basically went over concepts that I found the most difficult for me. I did a lot of flashcards, and I believe I took one practice test 3 days before the actual MCAT to sort of see where I'm standing before I take the actual test. And I know a lot of sort of tests taking websites and programs say not to sort of build in a schedule that goes directly into the MCAT test date. Some people say, take the week before the MCAT off. But, we all, study right before the exam. We all study even the morning of. And I think it's not really an issue. I mean, I definitely wouldn't study the morning of the MCAT. But even if it's the day before, just reviewing some outlines and reviewing some concepts, I think that's totally fine and could even be beneficial to sort of refresh your memory because it is a lot of topics that are covered on the MCAT. And it's a lot of information to absorb, especially within a 4-week study period. But anyways, I went into the MCAT pretty confident. I got a decent score, not the best score, 514, but it was good enough to get me into medical school. But I don't think I would have prepared any differently for the MCAT, even if I had 2 months to prepare. And I'm sort of glad that I restricted my study time to that 4 weeks because, as I mentioned earlier, my life was consumed by the MCAT. I wasn't really hanging out with friends. I wasn't communicating with my family. I would just sort of shut myself in my room and study all day long. It was definitely worth it to get the score that I did and the amount of time that I did. But some people, they do this over the course of 2 or 3 months or literally waste their whole summer studying. And I don't think it's that necessary to study for 2 or 3 months for the MCAT because you can definitely memorize and absorb all the information and content that would be on the MCAT, I would say, in at least 1 month. So I hope you enjoyed this video and I hope you take away something from this and potentially, use the same study method that I did, or at least try and condense your MCAT studying into a shorter period of time rather than, spending a whole year studying for the MCAT. And as always, Dattebayo.